Hello and welcome to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com. We're here to look at the Premier League action coming this weekend, and I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by WhoScored's Dan Worth, another debut on the podcast this week. And as always, Jonathan Wilson is with us as well. But we're not going to start with the Premier League. We're going to start with the FA Cup team of the round, Dan.
So the FA Cup team of the round is in a 4-3-3 formation. In goal, we've got Rodak. In defence, we've got Vitinho, Man Utd, Ream and Taylor. A midfield three of Cullen, Paulinho and De Bruyne. And in attack, we've got Mahrez, Iheanacho and Foden, with Foden being the player of the round.
Jonathan, you got any thoughts on that team? Or you past caring about the FA Cup now, Sunderland are out?
I mean, we got to the fourth round for the first time in 7 years, I think, this season. So
you got further than Villa.
I'm back on board with the FA Cup. Yeah, I mean, Iheanacho, I guess, is the interesting one because he's weirdly good in the FA Cup compared to other competitions. I don't know if that just means he's good at bullying weaker teams or whether he just gets more of an opportunity in the FA Cup. But I mean, in a pretty disappointing Leicester display, he again was the sort of one who stood out. I find him a really odd player that the difference between good Iheanacho and bad Iheanacho seems vast. And I find that quite hard to reconcile.
I mean, he's got an excellent record against Villa, so I've only ever really seen good Iheanacho. I've never really seen the bad one. I think Villa might be his favourite team to play. He scores against us every time he plays against us, so I'm not familiar with the bad Iheanacho. But Leicester in general, Jonathan, I think they're the ones that could get seriously pulled in. I think they're in big trouble. That FA Cup defeat in the week could really affect them.
It might do, but on the other hand, it might free up a bit of time for them. I know there's only maximum 3 games left, so maybe it doesn't make that big a difference. But I think the relegation battle is fascinating this season because I think Bournemouth and Southampton, you look at their squads and they're not quite at the level of the other 18. But somebody pretty good is going to go down, and it could be that Bournemouth and Southampton get out of it, and then 2 pretty good teams will go down. And maybe Leeds aren't that good. Maybe I've sort of allowed Bielsa or Leeds to slightly affect my judgment of them. But all those teams at the bottom, you kind of once a month they'll produce a performance. You think actually they're pretty good. And what Leicester definitely have is goals. And when Maddison's playing, you think they really can threaten anybody. And you think even of that game against Manchester United where they end up losing 3-0, they still played pretty well the first 20 minutes, half an hour of that game. I don't think 3-0 was representative. So Leicester a bit like Iheanacho. Their results don't seem quite to match their abilities. And I think the 3 signings they made in January, I think they should make them better. I mean, I think Suter coming in at the back just gives them a little bit more solidity there. I think him and Wout Fast together should be good enough at centre back. Tete, has given them a bit of added zest. So, I mean, I say they should get out of it, but I sort of think that about West Ham and Forest and Everton and Leeds, and one of them won't get out of it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the Premier League this season. It feels like some things you can predict what are going to happen, what are going to happen normally. But this season, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that's going to be open and it could even all go down to the final weeks of the season. Dan, we're working you hard at the start of this podcast this week. You've also got a Premier League team of the month for us.
Yeah, absolutely. The Premier League team of the month for February is in a classic 4-4-2 formation and includes only players that have made 3 or more appearances. But in goal, we've got Raya. At the back, we've got Trippier, Ream, Ben-Mee and Estupiñán. In midfield, we've got Solly March, Bruno Fernandes, Rodri and Marcus Rashford. And up top, we've got Ivan Toney and Ollie Watkins.
Okay. No real surprises in that team, Jonathan? Anything that stood out? There's a few for you then.
Rashford playing as a midfielder, I'm not entirely convinced by the formation.
You can have him on the left. I think. I mean, WhoScored have done worse things on this podcast?
They've done worse things, yeah, but I'm thinking you can get in and about that midfield. I mean, Rodri, okay, can sit there, but I wouldn't like me fullbacks pushing too far forward if I've got the other 3 midfielders there. Solly Marsh, I guess, does track back, but there's I'd be attacking down my right, their left if I was playing against that team.
Okay, so Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes in that team, which leads us nicely onto Liverpool v Manchester United at the weekend. Believe it's a 4:30 kickoff on Sunday. Rashford and Fernandes is current form. Dan, what do you think's been the big driver behind that? Because both had quiet spells last season, let's say, but this season both have been excellent.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Both have been excellent, and they love playing against Liverpool. Between them, they've scored 4 of United's last 6 goals against them in their last 5 games, which is pretty big in itself. And I think they're Rashford's second favourite team behind Leicester. He scored 6 goals against them, including the winner when they last met. But I think one of the big reasons behind their kind of impact this season is Wout Weghorst. All of the work that he does off the ball for United really kind of plays into Rashford and Fernandez's hands. He buys them time and just allows them to flourish. Looking at Weghorst, he's made more interceptions and tackles, 12 of them, than he's had shots, which was 8. Which is really interesting because I think a lot of people could, start using that as an insult to a striker and, start branding him as a defensive striker and all kind of things like that. But I think you can see there that how important that is to the Man United side. And as I said, it just allows the forwards to flourish a bit more, and they are absolutely doing so. And you just have to look at their recent form, especially Rashford. He's just, scoring goals every week.
Yeah, Jonathan, I was watching the Barcelona game last week on BT Sport, and the commentary team, I think it was Darren Fletcher and Robbie Savage. I know it wasn't Darren Fletcher, actually. I think it might have been Ian Dark. I can't remember who it was anyway, but Robbie Savage was definitely one of them. And the commentators, they were desperate for Manchester United to take Weghorst off and play Rashford through the middle at the time. But do you think Weghorst is actually offering a lot of unseen stuff, the kind of thing that Dan's just mentioned?
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's unseen. I think you look at him and he's not the most sort of graceful of players. I mean, the second United goal in the Carabao Cup final, it starts with Weghorst advancing, and he's a very weird runner, and he sort of runs on tiptoes with his shoulders back, and it sort of looks very ungainly. But then it's his little pass through to Rashford, which creates the goal. And the pass was perfectly weighted. Rashford's first touch was excellent, but from a not hugely promising situation, where the two of them were, I think there's 4 defenders around them plus a goalkeeper, they create the opportunity between them. So he's obviously a smart player. I think because of that slight ungainliness, because of the fact he doesn't score many goals, maybe people underestimate him. But he does do, as Dan was saying, all that work, all those interceptions, all those tackles. And I don't think it is an insult to say he's a defensive striker. He does a very specific job incredibly well. And modern football is not like the football of 50 or 60 years ago, where your striker scored the goals and your midfielders did the running and your defenders did the defending. You can have very specific jobs. And given the fact he's started every game, I think it's right, isn't it? He started every game since he arrived. That shows how much Ten Hag appreciates the job he does. And I think what's interesting as well is he's used him in different roles. He's used him as a number 10. He's used him as a 9. Or sort of in the position of a 10 and a 9. I guess he's not fulfilling the role of a 10 or a 9. And he does that work. He is that first line of the press. And you compare his selflessness to the centre forward there before him. I don't mean Martial by that, obviously. I mean Ronaldo. And look at how much better United are doing that. And look at how Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford have thrived. And I think people have very odd ideas of what centre forwards in the modern game should do. It's not just about scoring goals, not just about hanging around the box. It's about bringing other players into the game as well. And you see it with discussion around Harry Kane, that people say, if he hung around the box, he'd score more goals. He's often the Premier League top scorer. How many more do you want? But he sets up goals for other people, dropping deep. He pulls the defences out of shape. And Weghorst, I think, is incredibly valuable. Now, if he can find a player who does all that and scores loads of goals, well, obviously that's better. But I'm not sure how many of them there are about.
Yeah, I think Manchester United will sign a big name striker in the summer, but I also think they'll sign Weghorst because of what he offers. And if you think of Ten Hag's more successful teams as well, they've had a player like Weghorst in the team, and like you say, started every game so far, and he's been very, very effective. Dan, they're playing Liverpool this weekend. It's quite ominous, Manchester United at the moment. They've ruined my childhood in the main, but they won most things. They used to score against everyone's team in the last minute if they weren't playing well, and they've been gone, let's say, for the last decade, maybe. They're now they're back, and that League Cup win at the weekend, it feels like the start of another cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think both sides in this fixture have quite contrasting stages of that cycle. Like Liverpool feel like they're coming to the end of theirs and maybe the end of Klopp's reign, and they kind of need to rinse and repeat. But United are very much at the start of theirs, and winning the Carabao Cup is a pretty good place to start. I find it quite interesting looking at this point last season for both sides. Liverpool are, I think, 15 points behind where they were at this point last season, which, is quite significant, and United are 7 better. But looking at the difference between the two last season, United were 12 points behind Liverpool at this point last season, which really shows how far they've come. And I think it can only go from strength to strength. I know, again, going back to last season, there was a lot of chat about can Liverpool win the quadruple, which obviously never came into fruition, but I think mainly in jest, but there are a few murmurs of United doing the same this season. And, after a win last night in the FA Cup, you'd think that they can probably get through the next couple of rounds there. Europa League doesn't look too out of the question. I think they're probably favourites to win that. The Premier League being the hardest one, of course, but I don't know how many more wins they need to be in with a genuine shout of that quadruple. It's quite interesting, and I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on that, actually.
They do feel a little bit like the form team at the moment, Manchester United. I include Arsenal and Man City in that. Manchester United, to me, I could be wrong with the stats, but they feel the most consistent team at the moment in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think so. And you kind of mentioned about your childhood then. In the game last night against West Ham, I really did get sort of Fergie time feels from that comeback. And obviously, that's definitely a good place for Man United to be. That's when they've been their most sort of significant with winning trophies and things like that. So, I mean, it may continue.
Yeah, and Liverpool played last night as well, Jonathan. Did get a win and a clean sheet. That clean sheet will probably be the thing that Klopp's most pleased with. So they're coming into this game in not quite as bad a place as perhaps they would have been.
Yeah, I mean, they're 6th, but I still don't think they're anything like what they have been. I mean, I swear sort of facts can give a slightly misleading impression that there's twice in the last 5 years when United have finished above Liverpool in the league. But I would say this is the first time that the two have gone into a game against each other, probably since Klopp's first season at Liverpool, where you feel that the balance of power in that rivalry is on the side of United. There's been times before when United have finished a couple of points above them, but there's always been a sense they've been sort of patching it together. There's not been a long-term plan, whereas Liverpool, you've been able to see where they're going. You might be able to see why they've dropped some points because of an injury, or they had the very bad season during COVID. But it feels that rivalry may have tipped the way of United in the past sort of 3 or 4 months. I think there's quite an odd rivalry, given they're the two most successful teams in English history. There hasn't been. I'm not even sure there's been a period where the two of them have been really good at the same time. It tends to be one or the other, and obviously there are moments when they pass each other, but they haven't really had a period like Arsenal had with United, for instance, where they were the two of them were going for the title, whereas Liverpool had with City, where it's the obvious two of them. There certainly haven't been. There might have been the odd season, but there certainly hasn't been protracted periods where Liverpool and United have been the best two teams in England. And it does feel like it's tipped towards United, which shows given where they were in the summer, shows the remarkable job Ten Hag's done. Liverpool came. It's easy sort of say, oh yeah, we talked about them for the quadruple last season, and sort of write it off. There were 2 games from it. They were 15 minutes from winning the league. If those games finished after 75 minutes or 70 minutes maybe, before Villa let everybody down. Liverpool would have won the league, and they had 20 shots in the Champions League final. Real Madrid's 4, something like that. So they were as close as any team's ever come to the quadruple. So we shouldn't dismiss just how good they were and just how close they came last season. United this season, they're the only team who can win the quadruple because they've won the first trophy. Yeah, you look at the FA Cup, and Fulham was one of the harder draws they could have got in the quarterfinal, but basically they and City are obvious favourites for that. And you sort of, I guess you hope that an outsider comes through and wins it. That's the great storyline. But a Manchester derby in the cup final might be quite nice. Wouldn't be against that. you look at the Europa League, I think Barcelona were probably the biggest threat to them. Well, they'd beaten them and actually beat them, I think, much more convincingly than the 4-3 aggregate suggested. I thought they were convincingly the better side in both legs. And then 8 points behind Arsenal in the league. I mean, it's difficult, but Arsenal could slip up, and you think, well, City are definitely in the race, and United are only 3 points behind City, so therefore United should be in the race. So, I mean, it's obviously not the same quadruple, but it's not totally out of the question, and they definitely have a shout in all 4 competitions.
Yeah, one aspect that kind of shows the turn in the two teams' tides over the last year, Dan, is the fullbacks, because Dalot and Shaw have been ahead of Trent and Robertson in the ratings this time last year. I mean, I'm sure it didn't happen. It would have felt impossible. Is it quite comfortable? I imagine it's relatively comfortable at the moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, Dalot is above 7 and Shaw is 6.92, so they're both very close to 7, and Trent and Robertson are 6.87 and 6.81. So it's quite comfortable, but you're right. Again, I seem obsessed with going back to last season, but it was quite difficult at points to see anyone overtaking Trent and Robertson for the foreseeable future. So for that to happen, just one season later, I find quite surprising. One thing I find interesting about United's fullbacks is the impact of the competition of Malacia and Wan-Bissaka. You guys may disagree with me, but I don't really feel like Klopp ever have had that with Robertson and Trent, that they really had competition coming through, putting them under pressure for their spots. They're probably the 1 and 2 names on the team sheet, maybe behind Salah and Mane, but definitely one of the first few on the team sheet. And I wonder if that is one of the reasons why Dalot and Shaw are performing such high level this season.
What do you think, Jonathan? Because there's certainly no backup to Trent. I know Timișas played last night for Liverpool. There's certainly no competition for Trent in that Liverpool fullback role at all. But at Manchester United now, it does feel like there's that depth and that quality.
Yeah, and the fact that Ten Hag could bring on Wan-Bissaka at half-time in the Carabao Cup final to do a more defensive job, that I think shows the benefits of that depth. And I think you go back to, say, Pochettino's Spurs, and he always said, given how much running he needs his fullbacks to do, and I don't think Tottenham's fullbacks were particularly doing more running than other attacking fullbacks in the modern game. Yeah, he needed 4 of them. He needed 2 on either side. And so the fact you can mix and match them. I mean, Ten Hag, I sort of get the impression that any excuse he has to put Malacia in, he puts Malacia in. He obviously really loves Malacia, and which is fine. I mean, he's good. I just don't think he's quite as good as Shaw. But you even sort of felt that thing of moving Shaw to centre-back. It was a bit, wow, we can get Malacia in if we do that. And that was one of the reasons he was... I mean, Shaw actually did remarkably well at centre-back, far better than I think most people thought possible. But it did seem that getting Malacia in the side was part of the logic there. So it's obviously good. If you've got 2 players for every position, then that's probably about the right number that you can everybody can, there's it's not too many. It's not like Chelsea that you can play players regularly, and it also reduces the physical burden. Shaw, I think has had quite a strange career. He was so highly rated when he first came through, then had that long spell under Jose Mourinho when I think he struggled a bit for fitness, but also his confidence was clearly really low. Well, he's back, and he's got a great left foot as well as his defensive qualities. It's always slightly dangerous, I think, to sort of make these judgments based on an eye test, but he looks fitter than he has been. I'm not fully convinced by Dalot. I think that's an area where United probably will be looking to improve, but he's had a very, very good season. And the fact that you have the option of him or the more defensive option of Wan-Bissaka, I think is very useful. If you need somebody to take out a winger, Wan-Bissaka is as good as anybody at the defensive side of full-backing.
Let's move on to Bajcetic then in the midfield for Liverpool, Jonathan. I've definitely said it on another podcast. I can't remember if I've said it on this one or not. He's had a lot of praise, and fair play to the guy. He's 18. He's come into that pressure cooker of playing for Liverpool. But he's getting an awful lot of praise about how good he is, and he might go on and be a fantastic player. But I watch Liverpool and think he's simply doing the basics in midfield. But that's more than anyone else is doing in that midfield at the moment. I
think he's doing a bit more than the basics. I think you've been a bit harsh on him. But look, he's 18. And I think the game against Real Madrid, you really saw that. He really struggled. Now, that's not to say that it's not really a slur on him. He's playing against Luka Modric. Lots of very experienced, very, very good midfielders have struggled against Luka Modric. But it's and you sort of the fact that Liverpool have got themselves in this position where they're relying on this 18-year-old in a game like that is not ideal. Ideally, you'd bring him in through more slowly. You'd do what, say, Guardiola did with Phil Foden, that you constantly bring him off a bench, you give him half a dozen games a season and gradually build him up. Just thrusting him in as a regular is very, very difficult. And I think he's handled it remarkably well. But I think it's indicative of a wider problem at Liverpool that they don't have players at their peak. So this season, I think the only two players aged between 24 and 29 who've started more than 5 league games are Joe Gomez and Andy Robertson. And Gomez, you'd probably say, is not the bloke you'd want there, ideally. He wouldn't be playing in that back four, that he'd be a backup. So that, I think, is one of the reasons it's gone wrong for them. They've got a lot of old men and a lot of promising kids and not a lot in the middle.
They've also still got Mo Salah, Liverpool. Good omen for them going into this game is that Manchester United are Salah's joint favourite opposition with 10 goals in 11 games in all competitions. He's also 2 goals off Fowler's record to become Liverpool's top Premier League scorer. And he's already scored the most goals in European competitions for Liverpool. But what he'll really want to know is he in the WhoScored Combined 11? And is he in the Jonathan Wilson Combined 11? Jonathan, I'm going to come to you first. I'm imagining he's in yours. I can't say imagining, but I'm imagining he's in yours.
Yeah, he is. It's quite a hard team to pick because Liverpool's players, you know how good they can be. Some of them can be. And also, you know how badly they're playing. So it's quite hard to judge ability against form. But I've gone to 4-3-3, Alisson in goal, Alexander-Arnold at right back, Varane, Virgil van Dijk, the 2 centre-backs. Although Van Dijk, I hesitated over a lot given how his levels dipped this season. And I would quite happily have Martinez in there. Shaw at left back. Casemiro and Bajcetic is back in midfield. Although if Eriksen were fit, I'd definitely have Eriksen over Bajcetic. Fernandes just in front of them. And then Salah, Weghorst and Rashford as my front 3.
Yeah, not much to argue with there. What's the ratio, Jonathan? I always ask this now. What's the ratio?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Liverpool, 6 United.
Okay. What's the algorithm fired up for us, Dan?
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar, actually. It's also a 4-3-3. We've got Alisson in goal, a back 4 of Dalot, Van Dijk, Martinez and Shaw, who I think might be a doubt for this fixture, but he's got the call up anyway. Midfield 3 of Fernandes, Casemiro and Sabitzer. Sabitzer's included because we've used league ratings only, so he makes it in. And a front 3 of Rashford, Weghorst and Salah.
Okay, yeah, not too dissimilar at
all. So there's only 2 differences. Yeah, we've got a difference at right back, which I completely see Dalot's been better than Alexander-Arnold this season. And then I've gone Bajcetic and you've gone Sabitzer. I just sort of think we haven't seen enough of Sabitzer yet. But I don't think I've ever been quite so in agreement. This is.
I think there was 3 different. Wasn't there a different centre back as well? Didn't you have Martinez?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but I said that I wasn't against Martinez over Van Dijk. So yeah, yeah. Well, that's boring podcasting, isn't it? We agree.
It really is.
Yeah.
Wilson's Wizards and WhoScored coming up with the same kind of thing there. But, you know, it's interesting. It shows that it does show the development of Manchester United over the last 12 months. Because if we'd have been doing a combined 11 this time last year, I reckon ratio might have been. I think we might have even done one, and it might have.
It would have been.
You'd have
11 Liverpool,
Jonathan.
Yeah.
That's absolutely 100%.
I think it shows the development of the algorithm over the last 12 months.
Yeah. Well done to the algorithm. Not often it gets much praise from me and you on this podcast, but it's done well. Predictions then, Jonathan as league leader, I presume still. Not that anyone ever tells us what the league table is anymore, but yeah.
I might as well say 9-8 for all that matters. I'm going to say 1-1.
1-1. I'm going to go 2-2. Dan.
I'm agreeing with Jonathan again. Sorry, 1-1.
That's fine. So we all think it's going to be a draw this weekend. Liverpool have crept back into the top 6, and it does feel like 4th might be there for them to have a little go at. Now we're going to look at Manchester City v Newcastle next. Jonathan, as a northern man, I imagine you were pretty upset on Sunday when Newcastle didn't bring home the Carabao Cup.
I was absolutely devastated.
I thought you would be. It was my first thought.
No, I mean, look, they turned up, didn't they? They played and they lost. Never mind.
Yeah, it's hard to know. It felt like a real bad time for Newcastle to have a cup final, actually, Dan. They had the whole goalkeeper situation, but the form had gone downhill a little bit in the league. They're still having an unbelievable season and way ahead of schedule, way ahead of where you would have put them to be at this stage of the season. But if it had been a few weeks ago, it feels like it would have been a better fit.
Yeah, absolutely. Their form has dipped a little bit of late. But I think what's really important is to remember that this is the start of their era. I know especially Newcastle fans will be very disappointed to lose that final and, to have lost a couple of games in the Prem, etc. But you mentioned it there, that they're already way ahead of really where they should be after, this season being their first real go at it. Okay, maybe the end of last season being the sort of start of the improvements. But I think there's just way more positives to take from what they've done this season than negatives. Okay, yeah, it is disappointing to lose a final, but they got there. The signs are positive. You look at their record in the league, they've only conceded 15 goals this season, which is already a very strong basis for any side, which is, of course, the fewest in the Prem. So, yeah, I think Newcastle fans shouldn't be too disheartened. Okay, yeah, the season is probably over in terms of trophies, but as I said, it's the first real go at it that there's still time. And I think they should stay positive.
Of course, Karius played in the final at the weekend, Jonathan. It wasn't the tale of redemption that maybe we thought it could be, because cup finals are funny like that. But he was their highest rated player in the cup final, so credit to him for that.
Yeah, I mean, he made a couple of decent saves. I know he got some criticism for that second goal.
I thought that was harsh.
Yeah, I mean, Lloris had a couple like that recently, hasn't he? Where the ball's been hit at him quite hard from quite close range and it's deflected off somebody. And you end up looking pretty daft as a keeper. But I just sort of think, I played in goal in hockey. And, when somebody's striking the ball from close range, you're not really looking at the ball. You're picking up other clues. So you're not responding after the ball struck. You're responding to the body shape, where the ball is on the foot. And so if it then takes deflection after that, everything you've set yourself for is wrong. And so, he was sort of maybe a little bit low, and I'm goalkeeping experts maybe can tell you more about the technique of that. But the fact that he then looks a bit daft as the ball leaps over and he's sort of wafting a hand at it, I just think when a deflection happens that close to you, it's pretty difficult. So he wasn't the reason I lost the game. He did end up looking a bit daft, but I also thought his gloves looked weird. It looked like he was wearing gardening gloves. They were like brown and had kind of big things around the wrists. He wasn't going to get pricked by any roses wearing them, which is perhaps less important than saving shots. But, it's a useful thing to have.
Yeah, I mean, you sound about goalkeeping experts. You've got one right here, Jonathan, and I don't think there's much he could have done about that. I thought Carragher was really harsh on him. In the commentary, like you said, he'd already set himself, and he reached as high as he could and got a little bit of a hand on it, but he couldn't reach.
I mean, maybe there is something. I'd like to know what a proper goalkeeping coach thinks about this. That maybe the natural human tendency is to drop lower, and as a keeper, you've got to sort of stay slightly longer. That it's a bit like if you're fielding at short leg in cricket, or even at slip, the tendency is to come up too soon. And you've got to sort of coach yourself. You've got to constantly be telling yourself, stay low, stay low, stay low. And maybe with keepers, it's the other way around, that you've got to be telling yourself, don't go down too soon. But I don't know. If it is a mistake, it's a pretty minor one. And he made enough decent other saves that I think you can forgive him for it.
You've given me a theory here, Jonathan. Right. So I've spent some time in goal, and I went through a phase where I was playing five-a-side every week. Obviously, the goals are quite low, so everything you do is low. And then when I went to 11-a-side, I really struggled because I was trying to go down low for everything. Because Karius hasn't been playing. Maybe he's been playing a lot of small-sided games in training, so he's used to the smaller guys, and he's coming to the big guys, and he's started to set himself wrong. Could be something in that, Jonathan.
There could be.
Yeah. You're not as excited by that theory as I thought you would be, but I think that there could be something in that. Let's talk about Manchester City then, Dan. I'm presuming you might think there's a case that Pep should start Alvarez and Haaland together more often.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting question. They've started 6 games together, of which City have won 4, which may not sound that good, given that they're Manchester City.
It's not bad.
But they have scored, it's not bad, and they've scored 4 or more goals in all of those wins, and actually they've scored 19 goals in those 4 games. 4 against Bournemouth, 4 against Spurs, 5 against Copenhagen, and 6 against Forest. So, I mean, all the signs are there that they like to score when they play together. I think none of us here are going to disagree that they're both very talented strikers. I mean, Haaland has been out of this world this season, but Alvarez too is contributing with the goals. He's averaging a goal every 141 minutes in the league, which, is what it is. But I think the most interesting part of that is it makes him the fourth most prolific City player since we began collecting data. So only Aguero, Iheanacho and Haaland have a better minutes per goal rating than him.
Iheanacho can't go away in this podcast. He's
I know. Yeah, man of the moment. And I appreciate Alvarez has got quite a small sample size. He's not played loads of games, especially when you compare him to the likes of Aguero. But I thought that was quite interesting that, almost already he's being spoken about in the same sentence as Aguero, I suppose. But yeah, I guess to answer your question in short form, I do think they should start both and really go for Newcastle. I mentioned earlier they've got the tightest defence in the league. So it certainly wouldn't hurt City to have both of them going all guns blazing.
I think there's definitely a case for Alvarez, and there's a case for Phil Foden now as well. Jonathan, there's always a case for him. He's an unbelievable player, but he's been sat down on the bench quite a lot since football resumed after the World Cup. But Foden was the player of the week in the Premier League last week, according to WhoScored. It's Wilson's Wizards time. What's Man City's best front throw?
Haaland.
Yeah, good start from you. To really, this is why you get paid the big bucks. This is why you're where you are.
I'd play him through the middle, and then I'd pick two wide players. I love Foden, so I'd probably say Foden and Mahrez. But if you want to say Foden and Grealish, then on the Alvarez point, the game where City scored 4 against Tottenham was 0, where they were 2-0 down at half time. They didn't play well in that first half. Mid-team was a bit freakish, but they played together away at Tottenham as well, didn't they? And when they lost 1-0, and they played together Dortmund away for 0-0. Yeah. So I'd say that's a pretty mixed record playing the two of them together, given the nature of the other 3 games, which were, what do you say, Forest, Copenhagen, and what was the other one?
And Bournemouth.
Bournemouth, yeah. So, okay, against teams you expect to batter, great, play them. I would worry against Newcastle. Look at how Manchester United played against Newcastle last Sunday. They said to Newcastle, all right, you have a ball, you create, because we know you're rubbish at it. And sure enough, they weren't great at it, and United picked them off. And I know that's not really the way City play, but I do wonder if going at Newcastle and letting them attack on the break, given the pace of Saint-Maximin and Almiron, whether that play slight into their hands. I mean, the game at St James, that was this season, wasn't it, the 3-3?
Yeah.
When Newcastle were 3-1 up, which is a really, really good game of football. I was at that one, really enjoyed it. I'd be slightly, given how vulnerable City seem still on the break, I'd be wary about over-attacking against this Newcastle. For all that Newcastle aren't playing particularly well at the minute, and maybe they are there to be taken. I also wonder. I mean, I was trying to work out is what is it that about those 6 teams? So Tottenham twice. He's obviously seen something in Tottenham that he thinks playing 2 against them makes sense. Tottenham play a back 3.
Yeah,
but that doesn't apply to any of the others, does it? So I'd be fascinated to know what it is that makes him go with the front 2. The game against Bournemouth last week. I mean, it was that slightly odd formation he's been playing recently, wasn't it? The sort of the back 3 with Rodri in front, then a load of midfielders, then the 2 forwards, and so Foden was playing almost as a wing back in that game. And was it Grealish on the other side?
Yeah,
or was it
Lewis? Lewis was drifting in quite a lot.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, given he sold all the left backs, I wonder if playing the back 3 lends itself to the front 2 slightly more, because he can then cover the width through midfield, and maybe it's more to do with that than the opponent. But I look at that shape, and with a Foden or a Mahrez or a Grealish playing at wing back, and that makes me very uneasy defensively on the flanks, particularly against a team like Newcastle, where I know Almiron's not been in great form, but him. And I know Saint-Maximin's often not played, and Joelinton's played instead. But you sort of think they could get behind those wide players in midfield, and they could cause real trouble on the break. So, I mean, yeah, who knows what Pep will think? But as a sort of lay person looking at that, I'd say you go 4-3-3 and you play it much more orthodoxly.
Yeah, so Maximin does feel like he's come back to a bit of form in recent weeks. He looks a danger at carrying the ball, and he was very good in that 3-3 game that you talked about earlier on in the season as well. Let's look then at the combined 11s, and if I know Wilson's Wizards as well as I think I do, I reckon there's only one Newcastle player in your team.
Who do you think it is?
Trippier.
Yeah, that was the one I thought about. I still went with Walker. I've gone 11 City players.
Okay, I was nearly right. Nearly right there. You've just.
I just like they play so well together. Why would you break it up? But Trippier was the one I hesitated over. Trippier for Walker. Okay. I think Trippier had a great season, but City's quite a hard team to pick at the minute because I think Pep sort of picks very odd teams. I don't fully understand what he's doing, but I went Edison, Walker, Akanji, Diaz, Ake, Rodri, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva. And then a question about whether it's Foden or Mahrez, Haaland and Grealish.
Do you think you'd have had some more Newcastle players in maybe at a different point in the season? Or would you have still done what you've done?
No, because I always pick 11 City players.
Fair enough. Yeah. No, Bruno Guimaraes on the bench? No, didn't come close to getting you team.
He's probably on the bench, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Dan, what's the algorithm come up with?
So, yeah, quite different. We've got an all Newcastle defence with Nick Pope in goal, Trippier, Schär, Botman and Byrne. In midfield, we've got De Bruyne, Rodri and Guy Mahrez. In the front three, we've got Foden, Haaland and Joelinton.
Joelinton getting into the front three, Jonathan.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the fact he can play on the left or play in midfield is hugely useful. I was sort of looking at the game on Sunday, and it's easy to draw far too broad a conclusion from cup finals, but sort of thinking, there's a lot of players in that Newcastle side who I think will be phased out. So Dan Burn, probably one of them. Schär, probably another one. I think the midfield, Guimaraes' side probably needs a bit of freshening up. I'm not, Longstaff, I'm not sure is going to be there when they're getting in the Champions League.
He'll be there like Darren Fletcher, Werner, coming in for the He's Nicky Butt, Darren Fletcher, that type of player for Newcastle.
I'm not sure he's as good as Nicky Butt or Darren Fletcher.
I can tell he was as good, just about that type of person coming in.
Yeah. Almiron, I think, I know he had his golden patch coincided with Newcastle's really good spell of form this season. But Joelinton's, I think, is interesting because his usefulness in such a range of positions probably means he'll linger in the squad, unless they suddenly get a massive offer from somebody a bit longer than some of those others.
Score prediction time then, and I'll come to you first this time, Dan.
I've gone for 2-0 to Man City.
2-0 to Man City. Jonathan, same?
Yeah, the same, yeah.
Which means I'm not going to do the same, can I? I'll go for 3-1 to Manchester City. Excellent stuff. Making my way up that league that nobody knows where anybody is. Right then, Brentford v Fulham is also coming up this game week, and Mitrovic could be back, Dan. Fulham been doing okay without him, but he's been a big part of why Fulham are top six contenders, which sounds ridiculous, but they are top six contenders along with Brentford.
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, he's been a massive part for Fulham. He has contributed 31% of Fulham's goals in the Premier League, which, is very, very significant. And obviously scored 11 times. One thing I think is interesting is how good he is in the air. I know that doesn't necessarily correlate with the goals, but he averages over 4 aerial wins per game, which makes him the most in the Premier League of any player that's played 5 or more games, which it is massive. And I think one of the biggest compliments for him is that he does impose himself on the defenders and really gives them shivers. You mentioned they've done all right without him, but they definitely do better with him. And I think he's really proving that after that monster season in the Championship, he is that player who can do it in the Premier League too, which I think there's no bigger compliment really for a Championship striker.
Yeah, Fulham are a really interesting team, Jonathan. They've obviously got Solomon, who's coming off the bench and scoring the same goal every single week.
Very right-footed, isn't he?
Yeah, but it seems to be well. He's like Iron Robin. You know what he's going to do, but you still got to stop him doing it. And
there's a moment early on in the cup replay at Sunderland when he got I can't remember who the defender was. He got the ball, running at the defender, gets into the box, and he thought, oh god! And then the defender, either by chance or because he knew what he was doing, so forced him onto his left foot. And the cross was dismal. It just dribbled into the side netting. And he sort of thought, okay, he's very good at one thing, and it's a very good thing, but proper defenders, I think, can probably deal with that. Even Sunderland defenders can deal with that.
Yeah, in my opinion, they've made the signing of the season. Fulham in João Paulinho has been absolutely excellent for them, Dan. He'll be missing, though, for 2 games. He absolutely adores a yellow card. Can't get enough of getting booked. He's a huge miss because he's irreplaceable for them in that midfield. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more with you. He's actually made the most tackles in Europe's top 5 leagues with 101, which is 25% of Fulham's tackles. So that alone just shows how big a miss he will be. But if you look at the only other league game he's missed this season due to suspension when he picked up 5 yellows was their 4-1 loss to Newcastle. So that doesn't really bode well for Fulham in this match. But yeah, I think you're right. Signing of the season for them, he's been unreal, and the goal he scored in the FA Cup the other day was an absolute peach. So yeah, they might struggle without him, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, as a man who is the pride of West London, one of these teams is going to be the pride of West London this season because Chelsea are absolutely in the mire. Which one of the two do you think it's going to be?
I mean, they've both been great, haven't they? I mean, and they're both, Fulham are now 7 unbeaten in the league. 7 unbeaten in all competitions. Brentford 11 unbeaten in the league. Brentford maybe have just slowed down a bit, 3 draws in the last 4 games, but they're 6th and 9th. Fulham possibly have slightly more strength and depth, but yeah, they're both playing incredibly well. And I think they're also, I think the 2 of them plus Brighton are just very, very positive things for football generally. That it shows that even without huge amounts of money, if you spend it cleverly enough, you can be a top half Premier League team, and that's got to be a good thing.
Well, your thoughts on Marco Silva? Because obviously, he'll be a big part of why Fulham are in the top 6. Kind of had a mixed reputation in England, but he's gotten there. And for them to be sat top 6 in their first season back in the Premier League, he's obviously a very good manager.
Yeah, I mean, he made the big mistake going to Everton, didn't he? Which I just don't think any manager should do. It's just, it's like wandering through the forest and seeing a mushroom and going, "Oh, I'll eat that. I'm sure it'll be fine." No, it won't be fine. It's a bad idea. And he came to England having won titles with Olympiacos, which, okay, maybe it's not the hardest thing to do in Greece, but then his record here is he's never really at any place long enough for you to work it out. That he was at Hull, he was at Watford, moved to Everton, and he could easily just sort of disappeared. But what he's done with Fulham, getting them up, and then not just keeping them up, but quite possibly taking them into Europe. He's done a remarkable job. So I think all those positive signs you saw at Hull in those first couple of months at Watford, that looks like his true level, not the end at Watford or what happened to Everton.
Yeah, shout out to our producer Dan Rollinson. Second zoom in 45 minutes. Thank you for waking up. I usually use the zoom in as a opportunity to take a drink. And he's only zoomed in twice through the whole podcast. Both when Jonathan's talking.
I don't care.
No, you're not drinking branded cans at this time of the morning. I will say they're not alcoholic cans, just in case people are wondering what I'm doing. Dan's coming for his podcast debut. Not been zoomed in on once throughout the whole podcast. Disappointing work from the producer. Let's get predictions then. I'll go first this time to make it fair. Hello Zoom. I'm going to go 2-0. I'm going to go 2-0 to Fulham, away win. Jonathan?
1-0 to Brentford.
1-0 to Brentford, and Dan?
I'm going to do 1-0 to Fulham.
To tell you, the zooming on me was not pleasant at this time of the morning. Let's finish then, as we always do, with the Just a Minute section. Jonathan, you're first with Wolves v Spurs.
I mean, this would have been a massive game in the 60s, but it's only quite a big game now. Your Wolves now 15th, 3 points clear of the relegation zone. They clearly have improved since Lopetegui came in, but they've lost 3 of their last 6. Having said that, those games were to Liverpool in the Cup, which maybe they're not too bothered about, to Manchester City, which happens. The defeat that will worry them is the defeat to Bournemouth. So that was before last night's defeat to Liverpool. So they have lost 4 of the last 7. Sorry. We got a good draw at Fulham last Friday, though. They'll be without Hwang and Boubacar Traore. Tottenham, before losing to Sheffield United last night, had won 2 in a row after successive defeats. They're very up and down. But they are back up to 4th again, and they're 4 points clear of Newcastle. They have 2 games in hand. Liverpool, though, beginning to close in that race for the top four. Harry Kane got the only goal back in August when Spurs won this 1-0. Lloris, Bissouma, Sessegnon, Bentancur all out, and I think this will be 1-1.
1-1. I'm going to go for 2-1 to Spurs. Dan?
I'm going to go for 2-0 to Spurs.
Absolutely grim defeat for Spurs last night in the FA Cup. They just can't get near a trophy, can they, at the moment? Spurs fans will be very upset about that. Dan, your first ever Just a Minute is Arsenal against Bournemouth. I say an easy one, but it's nice to talk about Arsenal at the moment.
So despite a little wobble at the start of February, Arsenal are back in full swing with 3 wins in a row in the Premier League, including last night's 4-0 win over Everton. They're 5 points clear of Man City in second and will be very keen to keep Pep's side at arm's length with a home win here. The Gunners have only been defeated once at the Emirates, which did come against their title rival City. El Neni will definitely miss out, but positively, Jesus looks to be making massive progress on his return from knee injury. This game is probably going to come too quickly for the Brazilian, but he could provide a massive boost if he is declared fit. The Cherries have won just once in their last 11 attempts in all competitions, and they'll be up against it against an informed Arsenal side. But they do come into this game on a high from an away win against Wolves. Neto was their man of the match on that day, and you'd expect him to have a key role to play in this tie if Bournemouth are to get anything. The visitors' injury list is quite a lengthy one, though, and they look to be without Marcus Tavernier, Sosperegai, Stanislas, Zabarnyi and Brooks. However, Kelly looks like he may return after some time out. I can't see Bournemouth providing too much of a threat here to Arsenal's title charge, so I'm going Arsenal 3, Bournemouth 1.
It's exactly the same prediction as I was going to make. I've got to be honest, I didn't know who a couple of those Bournemouth players were as well that were missing. Jonathan, what's your prediction?
2-0 to Arsenal.
2-0 to the Arsenal. Right then, you've got Aston Villa against Crystal Palace next. Jonathan, the Gabor Kiraly derby.
Big win away to Everton for Villa last time out. That followed 3 straight defeats, in which I think the most worrying thing wasn't so much the defeats, but the fact they conceded 11 goals in losing those games. So keeping the clean sheet, okay, it's only against Everton, you can't score goals at all. But that suggests perhaps things moving in the right direction again. Goals haven't been a problem for them. They haven't failed to score in the last 13 games, and Ollie Watkins has scored in each of his last 5. Palace now, I think, are starting to get nervous about relegation. They haven't won any of the last 9. They're only 6 points off relegation zone. But they have only lost 1 of the last 6. So they've drawn 5 of those. The problem is getting goals, particularly from the forward line, and converting draws into wins. Their away form has not been great. They've only had 2 away wins all season, although their last 2 wins have both been away from home. Coutinho, Olsen, Diego Costa out for Villa. Johnson is out for Palace. Zaha could return a hamstring problem. Palace won this 3-1 at Selhurst, but I think this will be Villa winning 1-0.
And just to confirm, Villa haven't signed Diego Costa. It's Diego Carlos.
Yeah, so my writing's terrible. Sorry.
Is that right? You can have it. Even if Villa did have Diego Costa, I wouldn't want him coming off the bench. That's for sure. Predictions then, Jonathan. You did say it, but I've forgotten what you said.
1-0 to Villa.
1-0 to Villa. Nice. I'm going to go 2-1 to Villa. Dan?
Yeah, I'm going to go 1-0 to Villa as well.
1-0 to Villa. Brighton West Ham next, Dan.
Brighton go into this game after their first defeat of 2023 against Fulham in the league, but after bouncing back in the FA Cup against Stoke midweek, they'll be hoping they've kicked off another lengthy unbeaten run. They are undefeated against West Ham in any of their last 6 meetings, 2 wins and 4 draws. The Seagulls will be without Lallana, who is unlikely to play again this season. Colwill and Modder are both out as well, but they should see the return of Estupinian from hamstring issues, and Solly March should be okay to play after he picked up a knock. March is Brighton's highest rated player this season and is one of the informed men in the league, so he will be a massive boost for De Zerbi's team. West Ham swept Nottingham Forest away in their previous league fixture, winning 4-0 to gain 3 precious points. They've only won on 1 occasion on the road this season. Given that they now sit 2 points above the relegation zone, they would absolutely cherish a win here. The Hammers are likely to be without Fabianski and Cornet thanks to injury, and they'll need to conduct a late assessment on Kufal ahead of this match. I think this could run quite close, but I'm going for Brighton to edge it 2-1.
I'm going to go 1-1. Jonathan?
1-0 to Brighton.
Love the use of cherish a win. That's not a phrase that you hear very often. Cherish a win. Big fan of that. Jonathan, you've got Chelsea v Leeds, that David Hopkins derby, I believe.
Oh, yes. Obviously, a very brutal cup final in, when was it, 1970. There's so much to talk about Chelsea. I'm going to start with Leeds. Beat Southampton in Javi Gracia's first game in charge, which ended a run of 10 without winning the league. They failed to score in 4 of their 5 games before that. and they were well beaten in the cup by Fulham. They're fourth bottom, only a point clear of the relegation zone, so big pressure on them. Chelsea have only won 2 of 15 in the league. They themselves are only 10 points off relegation, while they're 14 points off the Champions League. They've only scored 4 goals this entire calendar year, which is the worst of any professional side in English football. They haven't beaten the top half side this season, and yet there appears to be no pressure on Graham Potter. The club keep on briefing that his job's safe. The players appear still to like him, even if fans are becoming mutinous. Scattering of injuries to both sides. Leeds won this 3-0 at Elland Road, but I think this time surely Chelsea will have enough. 1-0.
Yeah, I'm going to go 2-0 Chelsea.
2-0 to Chelsea. I'm going to 2-1 to Leeds, you know. I think although he's had heavy backing, I think this is the week it turns absolutely toxic at Stamford Bridge. So I'm going to go Leeds 2-1. Dan, your last game is Southampton v Leicester.
Southampton remain bottom of the Premier League and go into this fixture off the back of one win in their last 5 league games, which was a 1-0 win over Chelsea, and a grim FA Cup exit to Grimsby. In the reverse fixture between Southampton and Leicester, it was Southampton who took the spoils with a 2-1 win in August. The Saints will be without Livramento and Larios, but we'll be hoping that Shea Adams can return to action. He's been recovering from a knock, but there's hope that he'll be fit to play. He's their second highest scorer, so his inclusion could have a significant impact on the result. Orsic and Saliso are both likely to miss. Oh no, will both return, to bolster the Southampton squad. The Foxes were comfortably beaten by league leaders Arsenal last week and were knocked out of the FA Cup by Championship side Blackburn. Rodgers will be desperate to put a smile back on their fans' faces with a win here. They currently sit 3 points above the drop zone, so are desperate for the points. They'll have to go through this match without Tielemans, who is Leicester's second highest rated player in the league this season, who remains out with an ankle injury. James Maddison is rumoured to be ill, so he may also miss out, which is another massive blow for Leicester, given that he is their top scorer and provided the most assists for them this season. I've got this down as a low-scoring, cagey affair, so I'm going to go for 1-1.
He can't be ill still, Maddison. He missed the game last weekend for being ill. You can't have that many days off work for illness, James. I can't call this one at all. Southampton getting knocked out of the FA Cup last night is probably blinding me a little bit. I'll go 1-1. Jonathan?
I'm going to stay on the Iheanacho bandwagon. 1-0 Leicester.
Iheanacho to score.
To assist, to score, to keep a clean sheet.
To do
this,
it all.
This is the Iheanacho era.
This is what he does. We'll finish with Nottingham. Oh no, we won't. Yeah, we will. We'll finish with Nottingham Forest against Everton. The Kevin Campbell derby, Jonathan.
Scott Gemmell was who I was thinking of.
Mark Pembridge play for both, or no? He was Derby. Ignore me. You go on with your just a minute section.
Forest seem to be moving away from relegation zone with a run of 5 games, which took 11 points. But they've only taken 1 point from the last 3, and now they're just 4 points off relegation zone again. So I think any dreams of a comfortable end of the season probably have gone for them. It is going to be a fight. There's only been 4 games this season in which they've scored more than once. The only team worse than that is Everton, who've only scored more than twice. They have won 2 games under Sean Dyson since he arrived 6 games ago, but that defeat at Villa and then at home to Villa and then at Arsenal felt like setbacks, but defensively they don't look as sound as they did in that opening game against Arsenal. They've only had 1 away win all season, whereas Forest have taken 19 of the 25 points they've got at home. Andros Townsend and Calvert-Lewin out for Everton. Forest got 10 players either out or doubtful. And I think Dyche will get them organised a bit better. So I'm going to say 1-1.
1-1. I'm going to go 2-1 to Nottingham Forest. Dan?
I'm going to go 1-0 to Everton.
1-0 to Everton. Thank you very much. Now, I'm unsure who will be doing the podcast from Who Scored next week. We've got 3 different people in 3 weeks. But if it's you, Dan, I want a league table for the predictions. I want to see the state of play. I want to see what's going on. We know Jonathan's top. We don't need to worry.
I might not be. I've had a bit of a wobble the last couple of weeks. I'm not getting right scores.
The trouble is, if no one's been keeping up with it, they're gonna have to go back through like the last 6-7 weeks of podcasts and add the scores up. But Dan, I'd like someone to do that. So I'm tasking you with it. And if it's your face on this podcast next week and it's not there, you have to answer. You know, it's going to be a tough gig for you, tough pod for you. Whoever's on next week, it's going to be a tough pod for them from Who Scored. Thanks ever so much for joining me though on your podcast debut. And Jonathan, thank you to you as always as well. Thanks to everyone watching as well. If you subscribe to the channel with your post notifications on, you'll know exactly when our next podcast is coming out. Enjoy all the football at the weekend, and as ever, stay safe.